Hello, everyone, and welcome to our exclusive LinkedIn and Financial Narrative webinar, Investing in a Digital Age. We are so glad you joined us, and I really think you're going to enjoy the content we have in store for you. Let me start by just introducing myself. I am Terry Rand, the Head of Vertical Marketing for EMEA and LATAM at LinkedIn, and I'm also Financial Narrative Board Member, and I get the complete pleasure of being your host today. We are very excited to share some exclusive data and research that we conducted at LinkedIn with Coalition Greenwich. This research was inspired by the growing interest that we saw among marketers to understand the habits among their most important customers. And for many of you here today, those customers are institutional investors. Before we kick things off, I just want to move into a couple of housekeeping points. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom if you have any questions you would like to any of the panelists today to answer, and also if you're having any technical issues. We also want to make sure that this webinar is as fun and interactive as possible. So please do use the chat function at the bottom as we move through the presentation today. We would love to know your thoughts, and we want to have some audience participation. So there will be some moments throughout where we asked you for your opinion. I now want to introduce you to my awesome colleagues and my fellow speakers, Wenzi and Kiri. Hello, both of you, and thank you for joining today. I would love if each of you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role. And also, one thing that's not on your LinkedIn profile. Wenzi, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you, Terry. So hello, everyone. My name is Wenzi Antoli, and I'm a senior creative strategy consultant at LinkedIn. When I'm not doing that, what is not on my LinkedIn profile? So in a past life, I used to organize photo shoots and video shoots, and I had the great fortune of working with FIFA. But I'm not actually a football fan, and I don't know anything about football outside of what I've seen on Ted Lasso, which I totally love. But I did get to meet some greats, apparently. So I met Kylian Mbappe, I met Lionel Messi, I met Megan Rapinoe, and I got to order them around. So that was kind of fun. Of course, it was super nerve-wracking because I knew that they were famous, but yeah, that's not on my LinkedIn profile.
That's very cool. So you've gone from FIFA and all them greats to having a conversation with me here today. Wow. Awesome.
I'm just moving up in the world.
Thank you so much. Kiri.
Amazing. So hello, everybody. My name is Kiri Lilikakis. I am a senior insights analyst here at LinkedIn. I look after professional and financial services in the UK. What this means is, as an insights and data person, I have access to the wealth of data that LinkedIn receives from its members, their behavior on the platform, also its advertisers. We can look at things like platform adverts and off-platform adverts as well. And I also have access to the topics that are being discussed on the platform. I'm going to be using that information to talk you through today. What's not on my LinkedIn profile? I was interested in photography since a very young age. And then during COVID, when a lot of us found ourselves having more time than usual, I went out and rediscovered my hobby. So yeah, I do a little bit of photography. I think also living in London, it's got beautiful landscapes, beautiful people and situations happening on the street. So that's what I like to photograph.
Awesome. I love that. What a creative panel we've got today. Amazing. Thank you both for sharing. So let's move on to the agenda. So I'm going to kick things off by just giving a brief bit of background on the Investing in Digital Age report that we recently commissioned. We're then going to move on to Kiri, and as he just mentioned, he's going to be providing some LinkedIn platform exclusive data that we pulled around institutional investors. Wenzi will then share some real practical takeaways based on the findings from our research and actions around how you can engage with this audience on LinkedIn by looking at content strategy and best practice examples from some trailblazers that we have seen in financial services. We're then going to wrap it up and do some Q&A. So, okay, well, what a few years it's been. There's been such tremendous changes in the industry and institutional investors' behaviors. The way in which they do business and what they value in terms of content they consume has shifted since 2018, which was the last time we did this piece of research. So 2023, it was 5 years. It felt like the right time to do a refresh. And it's really interesting to see actually that from this research, 88% of institutional investors we surveyed have taken action at least monthly based on viewing content from an asset manager. This shows directly the influence and impact that the content you are creating as a brand can have. The research that we conducted was done globally among institutional investors with a mix of different countries. So as you can see on this slide, we've got a variety of different countries in EMEA, Latin America, and of course, the United States to give as much of a global perspective as possible. And 75% of the institutional investors surveyed have assets under management of over 1 billion, with a mix of different institutional types, including family offices, corporate and public pensions, insurance, and endowment and foundations. So very exciting research. Okay, but enough from me now. I'm going to pass across to Kiri to kick things off. Over to you, Kiri.
Thanks very much, Terry. So, like I said, we have a wealth of data here at LinkedIn. And I think an interesting aspect of it is the fact that our members come to us voluntarily and give us this deterministic data as to what they do. They want to update their personal brand and to let their network know of any potential job changes, etc. So we do have that information up to date. And I've used that information to define an audience of individuals who we think are institutional investors. The way, that this custom analysis happened and the way I framed it was we need to understand, A, do we have those people on the platform? B, are they engaged with the platform? And then C, what is it, if they're engaged, that they engage with? If you flick over to the next slide, Wendy, I want to actually ask the audience, if you want, those of you who feel comfortable using the chat and who don't mind telling us, how many institutional investors globally do you think we were able to identify on the platform?
You've stumped people.
Yes, I think I've got everyone. 87 million, okay. I think that's a little bit above what I was expecting, but let's see if people can guess. 100K, that's a little bit closer, yeah. 300K. Is that 10,000? Okay, I think some of you got pretty close. It's actually 2.7 million. So I think it's a good amount of people that, we can say with confidence that are institutional investors. So obviously this depends on how broad you go, but if you want to take a confident look at who is an institutional investor, things like people who say pension manager, people who say they work at the treasury or are a CFO of a small company, those sort of people. So it's, I think, a substantial amount of people on the platform that we can look at. And the next question you're going to be asking is, where are they located? Well, 32% are located in the United States. I suppose that's not very surprising to most of you. We've got 8% in the UK, 7% in China, and no after that is India. We do need to note that this is just the distribution of those 2.7 million people. And of course, countries with larger populations might be overtrading a little bit, but it's, I think, more insightful than if we had looked at population density, and perhaps we would have seen some countries that might not have large volumes of institutional investors. So if we go on to the next slide, we've established, yes, we have those people on the platform. The next question was, are they engaged? Well, I'm very happy to say that they are. Comparing those institutional investors to the average LinkedIn user, we see 45% more monthly visits, visits per month per person. So that's actually quite impressive. They are a lot more frequently on the platform. And when they do come to the platform, they follow more companies and they have 65% more connections. Again, that plays in with a personal brand that they're trying to use the platform to build. Click over to the next slide. And of course, it's not just looking at engagement versus the rest of LinkedIn. It's looking at that engagement. Is that growing or is it declining? Because you could have it, you could have them over-index in engagement, but that engagement could be going down year on year. Well, I'm happy to say that if you look at the first 5 months of 2023 that we've had so far, and you compare it with the same months in 2022, that engagement has grown by 8%. Of course, there is some seasonality there. You will notice, you will see around October, November, when COP is happening, COP27 this year, COP28 next year. People discuss things around sustainability, ESG, etc. So it grows. But overall, if you take the same period of time, you will see 8% increase. When we say engagements, by the way, we mean clicks, comments, shares, things like that, things that they would do, and likes, of course, that they would do with the posts. So if we move over to the next slide. And if you look at the platforms, the devices, sorry, I should say, that they do that is mostly cross-platform for them versus the rest of LinkedIn. So the rest of LinkedIn might be mobile only or desktop only. They are less so mobile only or desktop only. They are across devices. What this means for you as marketers is you will need to think about using mobile-friendly creatives to get the attention of a scroller on the feed. But secondarily, for those people who are doing desktop research and who are interested in long-form content, you might want to consider document ads, which are integrated within our platform and are great ways for you to share PDFs and specs about your offerings. So we've established the audience is here. We've established that the audience is engaged. The third question is, what are they engaged with? Well, this is where the data started getting a little surprising for me, because I was expecting that here we would see a lot of financial services companies. We'd see the likes of JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or HSBC, etc. So those big financial institutions, but none of them are here. Most of these companies that the audience follows are thought leaders. They are The Economist, HBR, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, things that they use to educate themselves and to inspire themselves and to build their personal brands. Secondly, I would also like to draw your attention to Google and Amazon. We see two tech companies, which reminds us that institutional investors at the end of the day, while being a niche audience, they're still human and they're still interested in innovation and things happening in the world. So they follow those big tech companies to learn more on that. And if we look, I think the best way to look at topics being discussed on the platform is by looking at hashtags. So what hashtags are basically is when you look at all the posts on the platform, you identify the posts that use hashtags and you see the engagement with those posts. We looked at the top 0.01%, so really the top most engaged hashtags. And once again, yes, you will see things like economy, you will see things like investment, you'll see things like business, but you will also see things like ESG, sustainability, and energy, which are, I know, can be a little bit controversial in the asset management world, but they are definitely things that your audience is engaging with on the LinkedIn platform. And then you see other things which again highlight the human element, like innovation, inspiration, things that they want to learn about, and tech. Again, once more, we saw Amazon and Google earlier. Now we see tech come up as a hashtag as well. So with that, I will leave you in the capable hands of Wenzi, who's going to take you through some more insights later, but also more importantly, is going to talk you through your creative strategy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kiri. So I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I am not admittedly an asset management expert, but I do work with the top brands and agency partners at LinkedIn to improve the effectiveness of their creative. And Terry and I, we really wanted to share with you where we saw the white space opportunity to reach and engage this investor audience. And believe me, there is a massive white space for asset management brands. So our LinkedIn best practices and the findings from the Investing in the Digital Age report, they can really help you to understand the content consumption behaviors and the preferences of our investor audience. And really, what is the way in which to package up those topics that Kiri just mentioned that matter to them in service of your brand? So what are those strategies and approaches that you can use? And as Kiri showed, there were topics of interest that spanned the personal and the professional lives of our audience. So what strategies should we adopt to reach them? Well, on LinkedIn, institutional investors are really on the platform to establish their personal brand, right? And that is their personal brand as a subject matter expert or as a leader, and really just to become the person that they aspire to be. So brands really need to meet customers where they are, right, as individuals, and think about the mindset they have when they come to the LinkedIn platform. We know from our own internal research that they're ambitious, that they're aspirational, that they're intentional, more so than users on other platforms. And you can see in this little Fidelity example here that they nod to that, right? They recognize the various hats that we all have to wear, whether that's being a boss or a guru or a maker, whatever it might be. And LinkedIn members, they engage with content that's relevant to them, and that speaks to them on that level, on that deeper level. And we see when it comes to content that they're consuming, that increasingly it's on social media and on LinkedIn, of course. And in the report, we had seen that it was important that the content was relevant, that it was of a high quality, and these were the leading drivers of engagement. We saw that institutional investors, that they continue to look for content that helped them to navigate the complex environments, that they're in, and that relevant and quality content that's going to help them to do their jobs really well, to be informed, as Kiri said, to be inspired as well, but as well as to kind of upskill themselves and sort of stay up to date with what's happening in the industry. And so, of course, topical content, right, is going to be at the top of the agenda for these professionals. So if we kind of drill down into what those topics are that are top of mind right now, we could see from the report that it's things like inflation and cost of living. No surprises there with the kind of times that we find ourselves in. But again, we saw that the innovation hashtag was, one that was in the top 0.001%, because this is a future-facing audience. So they want to know what's happening around, the metaverse or around blockchain and the way that it relates to their industry, right? It helps them to stay informed and up to date so that they can be that subject matter expert. So, there is this desire to consume news-related content on social, like, of course, on LinkedIn, and that kind of explains why, we see this increase in engagement from this audience. And topical content shouldn't really be hidden behind a walled garden, at least not all the time, right? It's all about providing value at each stage of the customer journey. And so what we see on LinkedIn is that it's about balancing your brand activity and your acquisition activity, right? Because both of those things, they make a material and commercial difference to performance. And brand, it contributes. In fact, it doesn't just contribute, it multiplies the performance of acquisition activity. And the reason for that is because the majority of your audience isn't actually in market at any given time. In fact, it's closer to the 5% you see here that are really in that mindset, right? Whereas 95% of your audience are actually out of market. So again, it's all about that value exchange that you need to consider. And that's those things that they care about, which those hashtags and topics kind of give us a bit of a peek into. But of course, we know as marketers that the reality is the user journey is fragmented. It's not linear. And so, you know, whilst we can use this as for guidance and a framework, it's all about producing different types of content in different formats, with the objective, of course, in mind that informs which format that we would choose, and of course to have an always on strategy. So it's about creating that helpful, enjoyable content that's going to help to generate engagement and build awareness. It's that high value content that helps to educate during the nurturing or exploration and education phase of the journey, as well as more targeted and specific information that's of course still enjoyable to consume, right, to help audiences evaluate and affirm their selection. And we know with financial services in particular and B2B, it's all about trust, right? It is a trust game. And when it comes to brand reputation, the most important factor when selecting an asset manager is exactly that. It's around, you know, the way the brand is perceived by its audience. And we see that to become a trusted partner, it really requires a focused effort and an always-on content strategy across that entire user journey. And as part of that, you should be addressing top-of-mind topics that relate, again, to the professional and the personal, as well as those wider societal issues. So we can see here 3 out of 4 institutional investors look at things like DEI and environmental sustainability as part of, you know, when selecting an asset manager. And we need to be thinking about all the different dimensions of your brand. So on LinkedIn, we have the 3 dimensions of any brand, that's corporate, consumer, and talent, and they coexist and complement each other. So your corporate brand will be speaking to your influencers, your stakeholders, investors, your consumer brand, or just your brand, really, your customer brand, let's say. It's about your customers, of course, and your partners as well. And then your talent brand is all about your current employees and, you know, candidates and future employees. So LinkedIn is quite unique insofar as you can speak to all audiences, and in fact you should consider them all in a 360-degree kind of communications strategy, right? And doing so will sort of help drive transparency, trust, and credibility for your brand, and just making sure that, you know, your messages and your values that you're communicating are cohesive and consistent across this kind of unified brand here. And those 3 dimensions, they aren't separate and distinct. And you can see with this HSBC asset management example here, that it's actually quite blended, right? You can see that they're kind of aligning their brand values and their leadership voice all together here. So in many ways, your corporate, consumer, and talent audience, they're all going to see different types of content, right? It's not necessarily just what you designed for them. So again, that's why that consistency matters even more. So just ensure that, you know, your brand as well is recognizable, not just in the topics that you're talking about, but, you know, the look and feel as well, and the tone of voice that you're communicating with. And when we think about trust, your executives and your employees, they're a key component in forming that, you know, trusted bond and relationship with your audience as a brand, right? They're ambassadors of your brand. So through their voices, they can become ambassadors for, you know, for you. And in the research, we saw that institutional investors cited industry perspectives from investment manager executives at asset management firms as the type of content that they most valued, right? And a third of them felt that not only executives, but individual asset managers they followed, that, you know, their posts actually caught their eye in the LinkedIn feed, and they found that most engaging. And so we do have a new format on LinkedIn called Thought Leadership Ads, and it's a way that you can boost and amplify those posts from employees. So Ryan Ryslansky, for those who don't know, he is the CEO at LinkedIn, and you can see here this post that's been boosted as a thought leadership ad, but it's quite subtle, right? It still comes up as his name at the top. And, you know, we're seeing already higher engagement. I said this is 1.6 times and higher click-through rate at 1.7 times. Again, you know, it does help to kind of build that trust and, you know, help be top of mind in a way that's really sort of subtle and not kind of overt brand advertising. And so beyond the format, we know actually that the most important factor by far to the success of an ad, right, that to, you know, this is measurable commercial effectiveness, is actually the creative. And sometimes, you know, sometimes I would say it is one of the, it is an aspect that is overlooked, right? And one sort of, I suppose, effective creative strategy you can think of to kind of an approach that you can take is using emotion. And this is true for any industry. And so we did some internal research and had a look at the impact of emotion on performance. And we saw that top emotive brands, so this is brands that had collectively, this is brands that had individually received collectively those top, how do we say, let's say visceral reactions, right? So those emotional reaction buttons. And then we compared the performance of their content at awareness stage, mid-funnel and lower funnel to the rest of the industry. And across the board, we saw that they'd outperformed them. And this is across all verticals. So you can see here that's 44% higher click-through rate and a 30% higher lead gen form completion rate. As well as the follower count, right, with those top emotive brands having more followers, and I think it's in fact nearly 200 times, which is massive, than the average of the rest of the industries. And what we do see, so this isn't necessarily a vanity metric because we have seen a direct correlation between follower count growth and performance. So definitely another sort of KPI to keep in mind. And it's all about making emotion a KPI, right? So connected to, of course, the metrics that you can measure. And it's definitely like, and I know it sounds very left field type of thing to do, but oftentimes we have things like, okay, we want to, you know, ensure we get a higher view through rate and video completion rate and that sort of thing. But actually, what really matters the most is that you get the kind of engagement and attention, you know, from your content, and that it is recognized as coming from your brand, because we know, again, that these top emotive brands are outperforming the rest of the industry. You know, and so if we think of emotion on LinkedIn, this is kind of what it would look like if it was some kind of an ecosystem or solar system. And here you can see that there are different kind of planets or clusters, and it's, you know, they're all inspired by the reactions or the emotional reaction buttons that you would hit other than a like. So it's a kind of fun way to categorize the content that you're producing. Is the content you're producing, you know, tapping into those ESG topics that Kerry referred to? So therefore people feel a sense of justice and fairness. They feel a sense of pride, representation, or is it content that's, you know, super informative and interesting, and they feel inspired or they feel impressed, you know, from what they're seeing, or celebratory content. But at the heart of LinkedIn, it is really all about community and care and support, because although LinkedIn, yes, it's a business network, it's a business platform, it's also a community made up of communities. And of course, people are, you know, are going to feel emotions, you know, related to the content that they're seeing and that they're sharing. And I think that is one of the reasons why this humor or funny face, I don't know if it has a name, actually replaced the previous reaction button, which has since quietly disappeared, which is a purple one, if you remember, and it kind of looked like this, if you can see me, and it was the curious one. So this is really interesting and kind of indicates where we're heading as a platform and the way that our members are using LinkedIn. And so, you know, thought leadership, it's the backbone to any good content marketing strategy, but it doesn't have to sound dry or robotic. Remember, we're selling human to human, and that means your message should come from an authentic place, right? And they should really reflect your purpose and your values as a brand. You should ensure that your brand comes, oh, I clicked too quickly. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I was trying to play these. Okay, you need to ensure that your comms come across authentic and human, and you can see here your ad creatives, they don't need to have a high production value, and in fact this authentic aesthetic, as you can see here, is really prevalent in social and performs really well as well. And many marketers, sometimes they forget that LinkedIn is a social media platform with over 900 million members. So, we are going to get a lot of representation from a diverse, set of people. And so it's really about adopting a natural and relatable and conversational tone of voice, right? And when you are telling stories, telling them from the point of view and the experience of the institutional investor individual. I. And, building trust is all about creating that sense of familiarity as well, and that relatability, because it shows that you as an organization, you understand me and my needs. And so when we think about, localization, I think a lot of us work at regional headquarters. But at the same time, we shouldn't sort of just be producing once and then expecting the market simply to translate. No, it's actually about creating that relatability and connection through localization that goes beyond translation. And that is because for a lot of people, where they live is so important to their sense of identity, right? And so it's things like, if we just replay this in that example here, calling out your audience by name. So this first piece of content says young professionals in Pretoria. Now that is definitely very localized, and then the imagery sort of reflects that as well. Or it's talking about your brand heritage and history in a particular geography, or it could be things like, see, with this creative here, which works really well obviously in the UK because it's a limited edition Royal British Legion kind of card that they've produced, and then for the FIFA World Cup here again, the imagery again is localized, so it's not just translated. Okay, so those are kind of strategies and creative principles to keep in mind. Now we're going to get a little bit more tactical now and provide you with some more actionable best practices that you can apply more in the immediate term. So what was clear from the IDA research was that video-based content was most favored by our audience, right? And we need to again think about that, the funnel or the user journey and the mindsets that the audience has at every stage, and kind of match that with the appropriate format type for the message and the content. And in terms of where video sits, actually video is one of those formats that can work really well across every stage, but in particular, it's very good for educating, but also edutaining, right? Because we want this to be digestible and super engaging. And that can be in the form of LinkedIn Learning video, a sponsored video, or LinkedIn Live events, such as webinars like the one we're having today. And we also recently analysed, alongside this research, FinServ ads with one of our content partners, and we, found some other interesting things. So in terms of video length, they saw there was an uplift when it was 15 seconds or less, when we featured people who showed emotion. And, you know, echoing the Investing in Digital Age research, we saw that, you know, again, it's this high contrast and all eye-catching and appealing sort of visuals in the videos that you know, add to performance. And so these are kind of little features or elements that you can consider and include in your next video ads to test out. So video was big, and then as Kerry had also mentioned, document ads was another format that we saw you know, explode really, from going from the beta to when it launched, and the adoption was, you know, shot up among advertisers. But not only that, we can see a higher click-through rate here than all other formats combined, or sponsored updates in this chart. And again, it's all about that value exchange, right? So document ads are a really great format to be able to, you know, designed for in-feed consumption, like those white papers, but sort of done almost like, so the same insights that you're sharing in that, but showing them in a kind of intuitive way, because you can just flick through in the feed when you're on your mobile. You can think of it kind of as a carousel, in that, you know, you scroll from left to right using a touch action, and it's kind of a storyboard, and you can use it to break down points. You can use it to share infographics or lists and the like. And really the popularity of document ads that coincides with the shift in investment professional content preferences that we've seen sort of change since the last time Kerry ran this survey. So whilst 15 to 30 minutes is still somewhat the sweet spot, I would say, for the majority of the audience, you know, many more willing to invest that bit more time, in fact, over 30 minutes, which is quite a lot in this day and age, researching and learning about important and complex topics. So we would recommend for nurturing users mid-funnel, or if you want to attach to a lead gen form at the bottom of the funnel to leverage white papers and digital reports for retargeting. But ultimately, you will, or you should experiment with different formats, and, you know, ensure that you have a diverse content mix, right? So people do have different preferences, as Kerry showed. Sometimes, you know, it's mobile, and sometimes it's desktop. And so it's, you know, it's wise to kind of offer content in a variety of formats to appeal to those behaviors and preferences. And also, you know, designing for social first. And it's not just about aspect ratios and formats, of course, it's all about inviting engagement and provoking conversation. So mixing in your paid and organic strategy, all these different types of content around content pillars that the investor audience would be interested in. And so actually here is a great example from 91. So at the top here you've got a carousel ad, and then here you've got a document ad, and really interesting to see how they've used them differently. So it's almost like these carousel ads are sort of billboards, and it's a very sort of singular story, and it's telling one point at a time, whereas here it's a little bit more like a website, if you will. So you've got, you know, you've got visuals, you've got diagrams, and you've got copy, but, you know, this sort of portrait format works great on mobile because you get to make more of the real estate. But according to Gartner, most people cannot distinguish one brand from another, right? And many, you know, financial services brand logos, I'm pretty sure they're blue or red or some such combination, and their ads, you know, they are guilty of leveraging or using stock images quite a bit, and then they're sort of accompanied by matter-of-fact captions. So I've removed the logo here, and, you know, curious if anyone recognizes who these ads are from. Could you tell me, if you were scrolling through the feed, would you stop and be interested, and would you be able to tell who this was from, right? Or even what industry it's from. So these are actually all from asset management firms, but it's not distinguishable necessarily, you know, what it's about or who it's from the visuals alone. Again, this is the first thing, right, we look at. And I think this is kind of part of the reason why the effectiveness of B2B ads isn't very high. In fact, one of our partners did some research and found that three quarters of B2B ads don't actually generate or lead to sales. So that's the majority of what a lot of marketers are putting out there. And again, we really need to look at the creative, being that it's the most important component to the success of advertising. And so it's not all doom and gloom, of course. We've got many trailblazers, as Terry mentioned, doing wonderful things. So yes, your content has to be valuable, but it also needs to be attributable to you as a brand, right? Because our job as marketers is to build mental availability and drive audiences from, unawareness to being aware of our brands, to then converted customers and, of course, loyal customers. And you can see here, HSBC, they are very good at using their distinctive brand assets. So this hexagon shape, I don't know if it's got a special name. It looks like kind of a squished hexagon, a slightly flatter one. But, we see them at the airports. They use them very consistently, but they also get quite creative with them. But you can see this creative sort of red thread that ties it all together, that kind of speaks to HSBC's international banking business here. So, this is a really great example of being super distinctive with your brand assets. And as I mentioned, LinkedIn is social, and we mentioned as well that, social is mobile, and it's important to design for mobile. So of course that means designing for smaller screens. That means designing for sound on and off. That means, it's something that as you're scrolling through your feed, that it actually causes you to want to pause. And I believe we scroll through 300 feet of feed per day. So that's on average, right? So that is, for those of you in the UK, that is the height of Big Ben. And for those of you in the States, that is the height of the Statue of Liberty. So, you have to think, does my ad actually stand out? And I think this ad here from Aisha is one that certainly does pique your interest. Like, ooh, what is that about? And it's very single-minded as well. So design for touchscreen, design it so that it's easy to get the concept or the idea at a glance. And it's, not sort of requiring a lot of mental effort to kind of tell me why I should care, make it about me as the institutional investor. And why it matters so much is that 80% of sponsored content clicks actually come from mobile. And here is a lovely sort of visual trend that we're seeing that works really well on mobile, because it is such, it's so vibrant and eye-catching, and it's this kind of these nostalgic tones that we're seeing, right? They're super trendy right now, and we see that some established brands here, so like we've got Deutsche Bank or Morgan Stanley here, I would guess that maybe they are also taking a bit of inspiration from the sort of best-in-class content that they're seeing as well. And a lot of that is driven by sort of the new kids on the block, let's call them, and that's those challenger brands, right? That's those sort of fintech brands as well, who have, because they're they don't have as much sort of brand legacy, they kind of have this permission almost to be that challenger brand and to own that sort of brand identity and be playful and be super visually eye-catching. And you can see that they really understand the importance and the benefits of being a brand, a distinctive brand. And they've kind of injected their creative with this big dose of personality, and I think it's really quite clever in that they're positioning themselves as almost the David to the Goliath, and with that challenger attitude. And so before we wrap up, I just kind of wanted to leave us on this page of, we do see some incredible asset management creatives on the platform. And here is just a sample of some top performing content across organic and paid. And I'm just wondering, if you feel so inclined, would you let me know what you think are the reasons that these ads performed well? So if anyone want to take any guesses, so thinking about the things we covered and we mentioned, around format types, around topics, around the sort of aesthetic side of it and the visual approach. I can't actually see the chat, I just realized, so I'm going to rely on.
We've got taps into human emotions. We're just testing if people are still there. We're hoping you're following us. Got relatability, community approach, localized branding from Sophia. Does not use stock photos.
Yeah. Love it. Yes, all these things, it's so true, right? So we've got, you know, yes, absolutely, all about, you know, the ESG, right? So we've got here Jeffries, we've got the Future VC, we've got Manulife, all kind of tapping into, you know, this social issues or environmental issues. We've got sort of that referencing, you know, this meme here. I'm sure we've all seen man with a sign. I think, I don't actually know what if the official name of that meme is, but this is Fidelity kind of co-opting that. You know, Wisdom Tree here being very topical. We've got, yes, that relatability and that humanness, right? You've got sort of Goldman Sachs here, kind of, you can see that this is sort of almost that employer brand that also works with their consumer brand, if that makes sense. And it's made, you know, it kind of says, hey, we are an organization made up of people with passions and interests, and it kind of brings that warmth and humanity to this, you know, this vertical, right? This asset management as an industry. And it's all very visually appealing. It's all very relatable and it feels authentic. None of this feels, like you said, it's not stock image, so it doesn't kind of feel impersonal. Okay, so thank you for paying attention and staying with us. Let's share some final key takeaways. So if you do any one of these things already, as we said, the white space is massive. You know, just doing one of these things will give you a creative advantage already for your competition, right? And that is, you know, standing out, having visual appeal, being distinctive, producing high quality content. Okay, it's, you know, less is more, to be honest. It's about being topical. It's about being relevant, being, you know, audience first, and of course designing for mobile consumption. So that's the format as well as social. So that's, you know, like make that snappy and you know, highly visually impactful. You know, experiment with the different content formats in your mix and think about the consumer, the customer journey. In particular, videos, document ads, and thought leadership ads should be in your content strategy. And of course, very important, infuse your creatives with emotion, right, and authenticity to drive that trust and your brand reputation. And your executive voice and your employees are going to be key to that, to bringing that credibility, but also a human face to your marketing messages. And so I shall now pass it back to Terry.
Thank you so much to both of you. You can breathe now, Wendy. Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed both of your presentations, and I love the examples and how you brought to life the points from the research. I particularly love the stat personally that says 87% of institutional investors said brand reputation is the most important factor when selecting an asset manager. You know, that's basically like 9 in 10 people we surveyed, which I think is phenomenal. I also love the fact that you mentioned about the different formats from video and also, you know, long form content, as the stuff that we are talking about generally in financial services is quite complex. There is still a need for this long form report, but it's very interesting to see that institutional investors are actually more inclined to read these longer than they were in 2018. So I loved seeing that, and also seeing the ad formats to kind of like bring it to life. And I saw a lot of comments in the chat, particularly about the thought leader ads that we just launched. So we'll get on some comments about them shortly. But conscious of time, I know we've just got 10 minutes left and a number of questions to get through. So let's just dive straight in, if that's okay. So first question here for you, Wendy. We have pretty rigid brand and compliance guidelines in financial services. So some of the creative examples may be tough for us. What's your suggestion here for implementing?
Yeah, and you know, the reality, of course, completely appreciate that oftentimes we're just a cog in the machine, right? And so what is it that we can do to make a difference? And I would say start small, okay? So it's doing experiments, testing and learning on the platform, speak to your account teams, you know, they can help with setting up A/B tests and such. And then when you're able to show results, you can then share those with your stakeholders. So we're not saying, you know, go crazy, you know, take massive creative risks, unless you can, of course. But it's about, you know, not departing too much from what your brand is all about, right? You still need to stay true to your brand DNA and your brand identity at its core. But, you know, what maybe things that you could start doing is thinking about that, changing adjusting the tone of voice slightly, so that it's more the tone of voice you might have when talking to a colleague by the water cooler, or, you know, that you pass by in the corridor. So we kind of start there.
Awesome, thank you. Now, a couple of questions around the thought leader ads. So one was around, is this placement through the company page or individual page? I can confirm that it is through the company page. So the example that Wendy shared earlier from LinkedIn is actually from LinkedIn, but it would be leveraging the employee that they are trying to put forward. So whether that is a CEO or anyone else from the organization. So there was a question here as well about who could be put forward for that. And is it just a C-suite? No, it's whoever you want to be and identify in your company as that thought leader that you want to help amplify your voice or help show that authenticity, get across that human nature that Wendy very articulately described earlier. So another one was around, it's great to see video as a top format for institutional investors. Do you think these need to be polished all the time? Wendy, probably another one there for you.
Yes, thank you. So not at all, really, is the short answer, right? Because we did say it's all about, you know, the emotions that we're trying to evoke, and it doesn't have to be highly polished. And although, you know, high production value video ads, they work well, they do work well on the platform, you know, to create that sense of authenticity. You can use things that were shot on a phone, right? And it's really all about almost getting creative with it, but making sure that, again, you're being super brand distinctive and being very deliberate with your execution. So I think as long as a lot of thought is put into it, that you feel it's creative, that it's human, that it speaks to the audience, then you can, you know, it can look a little bit more lo-fi and it will be completely acceptable on LinkedIn, because again, you know, it is more of a social platform. It's not, say, a publisher. So the kind of visual aesthetic is going to kind of reflect that as well.
Awesome, thank you. And Kiri, I know you're relaxing there, so I'm going to ask you a question now. I saw in the chat earlier someone mentioned about the word bubble you did around the hashtags. Can you confirm if that was vertical agnostic or not?
So vertical agnostic, yes, it was vertical agnostic in as much as the hashtags are concerned. So the hashtags could have come from any post on the platform. However, we did overlay that against the institutional investors audience, and that's where it becomes a little bit more vertical specific, in the sense that the audience engaging with the hashtags was institutional investors, but the hashtags could have come from any vertical.
Cool, thank you. And interesting, we're getting a couple of questions around AI. Shockingly, it's everyone's top of mind at the moment, reading it everywhere. So this will relate into the topics that we were mentioning earlier. Obviously, we were talking about 2021, 2022, because obviously a whole year comparison. Now in 2023, you know, AI is the big thing. You know, is metaverse still a trending topic now that generative AI is the trend of this year? I'm not sure if you've got some thoughts on that.
So we do see things come up on the platform, trending hashtags, and indeed AI is a trending hashtag in 2023. Now, however, I have to say that, you know, that doesn't guarantee, you know, that if you look at 2019, for example, and 2020, COVID was a top hashtag. 2018, we saw things like crypto, etc. So AI, I would say, is a very hot topic. It does come up in the top 10 hashtags on the platform if you look at a short term, and hopefully it will become a huge next thing as well, and we will see it in the longer term. But we are beginning to see those the performance of the hashtag.
And and just to add to that, I think the metaverse is still a hot topic, just because AI has found that relatable moment, like people thinking about how easy it is to use. I think the metaverse is kind of waiting for that. It's taken a number of years and there's been so much progress with AI, but it's just in the last 6 months that it's just touched our lives more. And I think they're just still waiting for that in a metaverse. Me personally, it was my first time I went to metaverse last year, where we did a LinkedIn event and we engaged customers in a metaverse, and that was a new way to do it. And it opened my eyes to the way that we as marketers can engage our customers, and as brands, how you can also do that as well. So I think it's just very interesting that these different things will go through different phases. So another question: as a B2B brand, I find emotion a bit hard to come across in our ads. Do you have any recommendations for this?
I can take that one. Thank you, Terry. Of course, like, not all brands are going to be able to say, be humorous, right? Because it pays off, but it's not that easy to do. And so we're not suggesting that, of course, you be like slapstick, right? We're not saying do Mr. Bean's kind of funny, because obviously that's going to probably be out of tune with your brand identity, right? But if you remember the emotion map, you can be inspiring, and we encourage that. You can be community spirited. You can, lead with your values and your purpose, and think about your brand persona as well, right? If it was an archetype, who would he, she, they be, right? And what emotions would they feel? And, and kind of use that as a bit of like a jumping off point, or to try to build out what kind of emotions make sense for your brand. And then, of course, the other sort of easy way to do it is through your employees and your executives and your thought leaders, because of course they have their own personal brand that they're going to bring to the mix as well.
Awesome, thank you. And keep seeing lots of questions coming through about thought leaders ads. So just to confirm, I will make sure that in the follow-up email through the event today, we'll put some more information about that and where you can understand more about that new format. But there was also a question here around, does LinkedIn provide any B2B influencer research tools? So there's no tools as such, but we have our own LinkedIn influencer program, which is called Top Voices. So we identify those people on the platform who are, let's say, industry leaders, using the platform to amplify their voice, and obviously providing good regular content on a variety of themes, whether that is financial services, diversity, inclusion, different elements. So I think that is a great place to kind of use for to understand who's talking about what in certain different areas and certain different topics or industries. But very conscious we are now up at time. So on the next slide, you will find a QR code, which is going to take you to a feedback survey. We would love to know what you thought of today's session. So if you have 2 minutes to spare, it will be very much appreciated. And I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's joined. And for speakers, Wensi, Kiri, thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing your expertise. It was so helpful. And also Financial Narrative for partnering with us at LinkedIn on this event. For those of you in the industry who are not already a member of Financial Narrative, you can find more information at financialnarrative.org. We'll be sending a replay along with other resources I mentioned earlier after this event. So I just want to say thank you again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.